Hello and welcome to the Whitelist Gaming channel. My name is Dentay, and in this video I will continue with part 3 of April Kelleher's story from the Division companion novel, New York Collapse. In part 2, we went over April's second set of entries after the breakout of green poison. If you have not seen part 1 or 2, follow the link that's on the screen now so you can get caught up. For those of you who are still with us, let's continue April's third set of entries, starting with April, Drew, and Miko leaving to go scavenge for supplies. When we last left April, Drew had just convinced Miko and April to loot a high-rise building with him so they could gather supplies. Despite the warnings April's survival guide had said about entering high-rise buildings, April and Miko agreed to go. Drew had thought he had picked the perfect building for looting. It was a new high-end luxury apartment complex that was mostly used as a vacation home for the rich and powerful. Drew thought it would be mostly abandoned and they could take the essentials that were left behind. They left the next day for the complex. While walking, April notes in the guide that recently Sarah had started to pull out of New York and that the JTF were now fighting off gangs and other armed units, possibly including the Last Man Battalion. When they made it to the complex, they were able to enter without being seen. They then began to work their way up the building, looting what they could. As they went higher into the complex, the floors began to stink of dead bodies and they had ran into several groups of squatters. Despite this, they continued to make their way up to the 29th floor. They ended up settling down for the night in a room with their newly acquired supplies, which included aspirin, camping gear, and boots. Before calling it a night, they turned on a radio to listen to news from the pirate radio to hear if anything significant had happened that day. Not long after, they were falling asleep and it was just the sound of the pirate radio coming from the camp spot. Screams filled the night, causing April to bolt straight up. Men in orange jumpsuits had heard the radio playing and broke into the room Drew, Miko, and April were in. In the chaos after their arrival, they shot Drew and Miko dead. However, the convicts had other plans for April, and she was soon knocked out. April slowly opened her eyes and saw that she was tied to a chair in a different apartment than she was before. The men in the orange jumpsuits were rummaging through her belongings, and April was worried what they would do next. Suddenly, a man entered the room, using his rifle like it was a part of him. The man looked like he could have been with the JTF, but there was something different about him. He was wearing normal-looking clothes instead of the usual military camo the JTF liked to wear, and seemed unusually calm for being outnumbered in a firefight against Rikers. The man methodically cleared the apartment of Rikers, killing them where they stood. Unfortunately, in the gunfight he was hit several times, causing him to collapse to the ground. April was still tied in the chair, but she could see the man was now lying on the floor, conscious but bleeding out. April rocked the chair back and forth until it tipped over. She was able to cut herself free using a knife that fell from her savior. She then crawled and looked to him as he was fading away and thanked him for saving her life, or at least she hoped she did. The man that saved her life reminded her of another person she saw in the back of an ambulance ride, and she begins to suspect that there is a secret society of vigilante heroes. April eventually figures out he was a member of the Division because of his backpack, but doesn't know it at the time. The agent that saved her was Doug Sutton, a member of Noble Squad who was simply avenging the rest of his squad that were killed by the Rikers, but was at the right place at the right time to save April. Before she left the building, she grabbed everything she could, which included Doug's go bag with all of his supplies, his rifle, and his handgun. The next day was by far the hardest for April. It was now December 25th, and April spent that Christmas day locked away, mourning the loss of her friends and husband, wishing that this entire thing was just a dream and that she would wake up from this nightmare. On December 26th, April pulled herself together and began to give herself a new motive to continue living. Find out why her husband died the way he did. I hope you enjoyed this whitelist video. As always, if you have any further questions or comments, let us know down below, or subscribe if you want to see more of our future content, including part 4 of this series. My name is Dentay, and thank you for watching.